Good evening, friends. Tonight we'll drift together into a story carried by sea winds and soft earth, a tale older than the islands that cradled it. Before we begin, take a slow breath in and let it go. Dim your lights if you can. Pull the blanket close, something with a little weight to remind you that the day is done, that you are safe, and that all you need to do right now is listen. If this calm wander through history helps you unwind, feel free to tap like or subscribe, but only if it feels right, and only after you've let your mind wander far from the glowing screens of the world. Now, let's drift to a place where morning mist moves like silk across a green spine of mountains, where the sea hums in its sleep and the first sunlight slides between the leaves like honey. The Māori call this place Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. But tonight, for us, is the land of long, slow breaths. I imagine myself standing on a damp patch of grass at the edge of a quiet bay. The sky is only beginning to pale. There's the faintest hum of insects and a chorus of sleepy birds clearing their throats for dawn. The ground beneath my feet is cool, springy, and somewhere not far away a voice rises, low, steady, rhythmic. Not a song exactly, more like the heartbeat of the land finding its voice. That, friends, is the whisper that became the Haka. You might know the Haka from modern rugby fields, those fierce stares, stamping feet, tongues flashed in defiance. But tonight, I'd like to invite you into a softer version of that world, the way it might have felt before the world's cameras ever blinked awake, when the Haka was less about display and more about connection between families, ancestors, gods, and the quiet pulse of the earth itself. Legend tells us that the first Haka was born from the union of light and darkness. The story goes that Tanerore, son of the sun god Tamanuitera, and the summer maid Hineramati, once danced for his mother when she felt lonely on the horizon. His body shimmered with heat, the trembling air you see on a hot day, and that shimmer, that gentle vibration, was said to be the first Haka. So if you've ever seen the air dance above asphalt in midsummer, you've witnessed Tanro himself. A divine little wiggle in the fabric of the world. I like that image. A cosmic child inventing dance not from war or pride, but from love and light. You can almost hear him saying, "Look, mother, I can move the air." And the world smiled. Of course, over centuries, the Haka became many things. A welcome, a challenge, a story told in motion. There were Hakas for peace and Hakas for battle, for weddings and funerals. Some were solemn, others joyful. But at the center of each was breath. Deep, communal breath, drawn in together, released together. The lungs of a people moving as one. If you close your eyes now, you might imagine that breath, the exhale of hundreds of ancestors across time. It rustles the flax, it trembles through wooden meeting houses. It warms the morning air that sits upon these green islands like a blanket freshly laid by dawn. When I first read about early Māori gatherings, I was struck by the quiet details. The carvings inside warenui, or meeting houses, were said to represent ancestors watching from the rafters. Picture that, polished eyes of red wood, serene and solemn, catching the flicker of firelight as a community gathers to recite stories or share food. The smoke rises, mingling with the soft scent of fern and seawater. Someone begins to chant, a slow rhythm marking time. Another answers. Then feet, softly at first, begin to stamp. A syncopated heartbeat builds, steady but never hurried. The air fills with harmony and thunder, yet it feels strangely soothing, as if the world is simply remembering to breathe. It's easy to think of the Haka as a storm, but its beginnings are closer to a tide, a rise and a fall. Energy gathered, released, then gathered again. The first haka might have looked more like a lullaby sung by the earth to itself, and that's why I find it oddly comforting. In every stomp, every chant, there's a rhythm our hearts already understand. If you listen closely, you can hear how the Maori used rhythm as a language of belonging. Each tribe had its own variations, some reserved for sacred ceremonies, others for laughter and teasing. The haka wasn't just performed before war, it was performed before breakfast, before visitors, before the first fishing trip of the season. A way of saying, we are alive, and the ground beneath us knows our names. Imagine sitting by a campfire as dawn turns to daylight. The ocean hushes itself for a moment, waiting. Someone begins the first note of a chant, older than the memory of canoes crossing the Pacific. You tap your fingers on your knees, feeling that familiar pulse build up like the sound of rain on leaves. By the time you rise to join, you are not yourself anymore. You're part of the echo. It reminds me of how people today hum softly when they work, or how we drum fingertips on desks without noticing. The instinct to move to rhythm is ancient. Maybe Aotearoa still dances in the flicker of fluorescent lights over office cubicles, trying patiently to remind us of the sun. And here's a small historical truth tucked among the legends. Early European visitors in the 18th century described seeing these dances performed in welcome. Captain Cook's journals mention warriors chanting and stamping, their gestures precise, their expressions fierce yet dignified. The sailors, of course, misunderstood it entirely. They thought it was a threat, and perhaps in a way it was, but only the kind that says, I see you. Don't mistake my gentleness for weakness. Even the word haka itself carries many shades of meaning: dance, rhythm, breath, energy. There's a tenderness in that breath, isn't there? The same word could mean to celebrate or to grieve. Maybe that's why the haka still touches people. It holds the full spectrum of human feeling, but always within order, always within ritual, like waves returning to the same shore. As the mist thins over our imaginary bay, I picture villagers finishing the morning haka. The sound fades, replaced by the rustle of cloaks, the crackle of small cooking fires being rekindled. Children chase each other between carved posts. Somewhere, an elder hums a slower tune, a winding down song, a musical sigh after exertion. The chanters become calm again. The world exhales, and here, in that quiet moment, I like to think about the way every culture builds a rhythm for itself. The Japanese have their taiko drums, the Scots their bagpipes, the West Africans their talking drums. The Maori had the haka. Each one says, we exist together in this beat. When you strip away the labels, they all sound a little like the human heart. If you're lying there now, half between wakefulness and dream, maybe you can feel that rhythm too. A faint echo in your chest, matching the story's slow tide. Let it roll through you. No need to move, no need to think. Just the warmth of blankets, the hush of a distant ocean in your imagination, and the knowledge that once, long ago, people stood on these shores greeting the morning with gratitude disguised as thunder. It's funny how what looks fierce from the outside can feel so peaceful inside. The haka's movements, stamping, clapping, chest beating, were never random. Each motion had a meaning, often drawn from nature. The wings of a bird, the push of a wave, the strike of a spear. Over time, they became a language of gestures, and just as every language changes over centuries, so did the haka, absorbing humor, ceremony, even sport. Yet it never lost that first shimmer of Aotearoa. dancing for his mother in the heat of summer. Maybe that's the secret to endurance. Start with something kind and let it echo through time. If you were to visit Aotearoa today, you'd still see that shimmer in modern hakas, performed by students, families, athletes. It's less about competition and more about remembrance. Each stomp carries a whisper. We are still here. It's the kind of pride that hums quietly, like a note you can feel more than hear. So as we rest here, listening to the imaginary surf, think of that gentle origin, one God's dance for his mother, turning into a nation's heartbeat. Think of how something so small as a shimmer in the air can travel through centuries to touch your ears tonight, across oceans, through speakers, beneath a blanket. History, when told softly, is never boring. It's just waiting for someone calm enough to listen. And as our first chapter closes, the mist around the bay fades into gold. The villagers return to their huts, laughter drifting like smoke. The earth sighs, content for now. The waves nudge the sand with a slow rhythm of breath. We'll leave them there, feet cooling on wet grass, hearts warm from the dance. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let your thoughts drift like clouds over green hills. In our next chapter, we'll follow the canoes that carried these rhythms across the Pacific, tracing the sleepy melody of migration and belonging. But for now, stay in the hush, feel the breath of dawn, and rest. Good evening again, my wandering friend. If your eyes are still half closed from the last story, stay that way. You don't need to see the words, just let them pass like waves under the hull of a canoe. Feel the hush of night around you, the slow roll of breath in your chest. The day has long gone to sleep. Now it's our turn to follow. Before we push off, maybe adjust your pillow, the way a sailor checks a sail. Make sure the blanket covers your shoulders, and if this gentle voyage brings a little calm to your world, you can always leave a quiet like or subscribe later. But only if your eyelids will allow it. Now come with me. Imagine the sea stretching endlessly in every direction. No planes, no maps, no Wi-Fi. Only stars so clear they look close enough to pluck from the sky. We are somewhere in the South Pacific, maybe 800, maybe 1,000 years ago. The air smells faintly of salt and pandanus leaves. Wooden canoes carved by hand and heart rest on a beach of crushed coral. Fires flicker. Someone hums a tune older than any written word. That tune is not yet called a haka, but it carries the same pulse. The steady beat of people who know how to move with the world, not against it. I step closer to one of the canoes. It's long and graceful, lashed together with coconut fiber. The surface gleams with fish oil and moonlight. Around it stand men and women tying bundles of food, dried taro, smoked fish, gourds of water sealed with leaves. Children dart between them, pretending to steer invisible boats through the sand. The ocean answers each laugh with a small silver wave. An elder raises a hand. The hum fades. Silence, except for the breath of the sea. Then softly, he begins to chant, a slow, undulating rhythm that rises like the tide. Others join, voices weaving in layers, some deep as thunder, others high and trembling. It is both song and prayer, a way of asking permission from the waves. You can almost feel the air thicken, charged with something sacred. Each note is a paddle dipped into time. I close my eyes and imagine the scene as the first voyagers of Aotearoa might have lived it. Centuries before Cook, before maps drew lines across oceans. Polynesian navigators, guided by stars and memory, setting out from Hawaii, the legendary homeland. Hawaii may have been a real island, or many islands, or simply the place our hearts return to when we dream. It doesn't matter. Every culture has a Hawaii somewhere in its stories. The canoes push off. Wood creaks, ropes sigh, waves slap gently against hulls. Soon the beach is a whisper behind them. The paddlers find their rhythm. Dip, lift, drip, dip, lift, drip. The moon slides across the sky like a silent guardian. For days, maybe weeks, the voyagers follow the signs. The angle of a bird's flight, the color of clouds, the taste of wind. They sleep in shifts, dream in whispers. And sometimes, when the sea grows too calm, when spirits droop, they chant again. A rhythm to keep paddles moving, to remind the body that it belongs to the group. That collective heartbeat. Yes, that is where the Haka hides, curled up like a seashell, waiting to be born. It's soothing, isn't it? The thought that music kept people alive on endless seas. We hum in traffic today for the same reason. We need rhythm to survive the waiting. A soft drizzle begins, fine as spider silk. The sailors laugh. Rain means the gods are listening. They tilt their faces upward, letting drops wash away salt. One of them taps the side of the canoe and begins a playful verse about a bird stealing his lunch. Laughter spreads like sunlight through fog. For a moment, even the ocean seems amused. That is how the Haka lived, sometimes fierce, sometimes funny, always human. As dawn edges over the horizon, a shout rises. Land! It's faint at first, just a darker smudge on the rim of the world. But the smell changes. Earth, fern, wet bark. The canoes surge forward, paddles flashing in rhythm. The chant grows louder, faster. The new land waits, wrapped in mist. When they touch the shore, no trumpets announce their arrival. Only the sigh of wind through trees. Someone steps onto the sand and kneels, pressing a palm to the ground. "We are home," he murmurs. In that single gesture, you can feel the future. Villages, carvings, songs and dances. The Haka, when it arrives generations later, will carry this same reverence for earth touched for the first time. I picture the first fires built on Aotearoa's beaches. Sparks drift upward into the morning mist, like tiny ancestors climbing home. Fish roast on sticks. Shells hiss in the heat. The air tastes of smoke and seaweed. Children chase seabirds, squealing. Somewhere an elder hums again. Low, patient, timeless. That hum is the seed of everything to come. Have you noticed how history often begins quietly? No fanfare, no bold declarations. Just a group of tired travelers sharing breakfast. The Haka's lineage begins in that silence between bites. The early MΑORI settled slowly, following rivers, forests, the calls of birds. Each tribe, or iwi, learned its own rhythm from the land, some sharp and wind-cut like the coasts, others deep and mellow like inland valleys. Over generations, those rhythms turned into dances, chants, ceremonies. Each movement mirrored what surrounded them, the crash of waves, the sway of flax, the glide of a heron. Even now, if you walk through a New Zealand forest at dawn, you can almost hear that choreography in the branches, the way the breeze pauses, then resumes, as if keeping time with invisible drums. One story tells of a navigator named Kupe, who discovered the islands after chasing a great octopus across the sea. When he and his wife first saw land, they danced on the deck, stamping to keep their balance. Some say that was the first greeting Haka on these shores, a dance of relief disguised as celebration. I like to think of it as joy that couldn't sit still. The more you learn about these tales, the more they blur between history and lullaby. And maybe that's the point. Facts feed the mind, but stories feed the spirit, especially when told under the sleepy glow of night. I often imagine how those first nights must have felt for the settlers. The forest would hum with unknown insects, the air cool and heavy with new smells. Fires crackled softly. Beyond the flicker of light, darkness pressed close, curious and watchful. They must have felt both tiny and infinite. To ease the unease, someone would begin a rhythm. Maybe 2 hands slapping thighs, maybe feet tapping dirt. Soon voices joined, and the dark stepped back a little, comforted. That's what song does. It convinces the night that we mean no harm. The chants evolved, becoming ways to remember roots, ancestors, stars. Every tribe added verses like knots on a rope. If you forget the words, you forget the path. The Haka was memory set to movement, muscle carrying what parchment could not. Somewhere in that long lineage, the dance became a mirror of life itself. Birth, work, battle, laughter, death. Each moment a pulse. You see, the Haka was never only for warriors. There were Hakas for planting crops, for courting, for welcoming travelers. The Haka was the language of living fully, even quietly. And yet, there is gentleness in that power. Watching a Haka up close feels less like being shouted at and more like being invited into a heartbeat larger than your own. You don't need to understand every word. The rhythm does the explaining. The voyagers couldn't have known their chants would survive 1,000 years, filmed and streamed to distant insomniacs wrapped in blankets. But here we are, listening across time. I like to think the ancestors would smile at that. Their bedtime stories helping modern strangers drift into dreams. The mist thickens again in our imagination. The fires on shore fade to embers. The voyagers sleep at last, bellies full, hearts still moving to invisible drums. The ocean, ever patient, strokes the sand beside them, whispering lullabies in a language of foam. Let your mind rest on that beach for a while. Hear the gentle slap of waves, the sigh of a woven sail collapsing for the night. Maybe there's a faint song still in the air, carried by the wind, reminding you that no matter how far you travel, rhythm will find you. Because rhythm, like home, is never really lost. It just waits for you to close your eyes. And as we leave these sleeping sailors beneath their new stars, the story will drift inland next. In the coming chapter, we'll wander into the forests where ancestors carved meeting houses and taught children to speak with the drumbeat of their hearts. For now, breathe with the sea, in and out. Let the tide carry you a little deeper into rest. The canoes that carried the sky have reached their shore. And so, for tonight have you. Good evening again, traveller of dreams. You've crossed the sea with me, felt the mist on your face, and heard the ocean sigh itself to sleep. Now, as the tide pulls away and the canoes rest on their bellies of sand, we wander inland, slowly, softly, as if not to wake the land. Before we step further, make sure you're comfortable. Let the blanket rest like a cloud over your shoulders. Maybe sip a little water, just as the voyagers once did before setting foot on unknown earth. And if this calm journey brings even a hint of peace to your evening, you can always whisper a like or subscribe for another tale later, only if your heart feels it, and only after your mind has settled like evening fog. Now breathe. We're moving through forests that hum in green and gold. The morning mist lifts, and ferns uncurl themselves, shy as waking cats. Every drop of dew seems to hold a tiny sunrise. The first villages of Aotearoa weren't large. Clusters of houses, gardens, meeting places, built where rivers bent or soil turned kind. The people called them pa, not just fortresses, but homes, hearts, and memory banks. The air around them smelled of smoke and wood sap. Somewhere in the middle stood the Werenui, the meeting house, carved with ancestors who never stopped watching. If you listen, you can almost hear them. Not with ears, but through the skin. The quiet creak of wood shifting in the cool, the distant echo of laughter and chanting carried through the valley. I walk in my imagination through one of those villages. A dog stretches lazily near a cooking fire. Children run barefoot through the dirt, their giggles tumbling like pebbles in a stream. Women weave mats from flax, fingers moving so quickly they blur. A man sharpens a chisel on a stone, shaping the curved line of a face into a post. The smell of roasted kumara, sweet potato, drifts on the breeze. And somewhere, always somewhere, a rhythm begins. It starts small, a stick tapping against wood, a foot marking time, the low murmur of words half sung. Others answer, a chain of voices, like ripples crossing a pond. This is the heartbeat of the village, the daily rehearsal of unity. People think of Haka as performance, but here it's conversation. It's how the people greet the morning, thank the harvest, honor the ancestors. Every rhythm is a thread tying them to each other. Let me tell you, I whisper, the Haka was never just noise. If you lean closer, you'd see that every gesture, every turn of the wrist, every stamp of a heel, spoke its own language. Fingers fluttering could mean wind through trees. Eyes widening, the spark of discovery. Tongues extended, the fierce humor of defiance. It was theater and prayer rolled into one. One elder, grey as driftwood, might stand before the gathering, voice steady as the river. We begin with the breath, and all would inhale together. A long, slow draw that filled chests and bellies. Then came the release, a chorus exhale that rolled like thunder through the valley. I like to imagine it echoing between the hills, softened by distance until it sounds like the land itself sighing with them. Sometimes at twilight, when shadows stretched long and purple, the villagers would gather outside the Waranui. Children climbed onto parents' knees. Fires painted faces amber. And the storyteller, usually the same old man who could still out-chant everyone, would begin. His voice rasped like flax rope, yet it carried the smooth confidence of someone who's told this story 1,000 times and will tell it 1,000 more. He might begin with the gods, or with a storm, or simply with a mischievous ancestor who outdanced a mountain. The details changed each night, but the rhythm stayed the same. The pauses were as important as the words. You could fall asleep to them, some did, and he never minded. Falling asleep during a story was a compliment. It meant the world felt safe again. Have you ever noticed how certain sounds, wood against wood, a low hum, gentle laughter, can calm the nervous system faster than silence? The villagers knew this long before science caught up. They used rhythm as medicine, a communal heartbeat to slow the racing ones. In the stillness between stories, you'd hear the rustle of the forest pressing close, the wind speaking through tall trees. Somewhere an owl might call, and the people, warmed by fire and fatigue, would hum the last line of a chant before curling up beneath woven mats. That hum, oh that hum, was the cradle of the Haka. When morning came, smoke would climb from hearths again. The forest shimmered with dew. Birds resumed their gossip, and work began, gardening, fishing, carving, trading. But rhythm followed everything, like a shadow. Even grinding grain or paddling upriver came with a beat, a murmur of shared breath. It said that travelers could tell which valley they'd entered just by the style of its chants. Some were clipped and fast like rain on bamboo. Others long and sweeping, drawn out like a sigh. The Haka had dialects, accents, personalities. It was identity made audible. Imagine standing in one valley hearing a group chant their ancestral line, their feet stamping in sync, dust lifting into sunlight. Then, far away across a ridge, another tribe replies, echoing the cadence, answering the story. Two mountains speaking through human lungs. The land learned its own harmony. That's why this chapter is called The Village That Spoke in Echoes. Because sound was not decoration, it was dialogue. The earth replied with echo, and the people took that as proof that they were heard. One winter night, I imagine, the rain drummed hard on the roofs of the Huaranui. The villagers huddled inside, firelight trembling over carved faces on the walls. The storyteller was tired, so a young woman, barely more than a girl, rose to speak instead. She began softly, telling of the sun god and his son, Aotearoa, the first dancer. But then she added something new. She mimicked the shimmer of heat with her hands, the flicker of flame, her fingers wiggling delicately in the air. The crowd laughed in delight, copying her motion. And there it was, a new gesture born, a new branch on the tree of Haka. Creation, even in its smallest form, often happens in laughter. As she finished, an old man said, "That's shimmer. That's how the gods breathe." And everyone nodded, half in jest, half in awe. From that night on, whenever they danced, they added her movement, the shimmer, the flicker, to the start of their haka, a memory of both heat and humor. The first moves of dawn performed in a rainstorm. Stories like that rarely make it into history books, but they live on in the muscles of descendants. And that's the real archive of culture, the body. I imagine you now, lying in your own quiet room, body still, breath slow. Even so, there's a rhythm beneath your ribs, patient and eternal. The same rhythm that once echoed through those villages. In a way, you're part of the same story. Different time zone, same heartbeat. If you listen closely, maybe you can hear the layers of sound behind my voice, the distant drum, the soft whisper of trees, the sigh of embers cooling. Those are echoes too. The village still speaks, just softer now. And in the hush between sentences, you might notice something magical. The silence isn't empty. It's full of everything that came before, the chant, the laughter, the shimmer of heat. That's how memory works. It hums quietly, like the sea beneath a calm sky. As night falls over our imagined village, the fires dim again. A child mumbles in her sleep. Somewhere, a dog sighs. The old storyteller, who pretended to nap through the young woman's performance, smiles to himself in the dark. He knows tomorrow the children will imitate her dance in the mud, their laughter carrying through the valley like birds. And so the haka grows, not by decree, but by play, not through conquest, but through community. The rain stops. Steam rises from the roofs. The forest releases that earthy, sweet smell it saves for after storms. The air feels freshly washed, ready for another day of rhythm. We'll leave them there, our friends in the echoing village, dreaming beneath carvings that glow faintly in the ember's light. And as your own eyelids begin to grow heavy, you can rest, knowing that every sound, every breath, every shimmer of movement we've described tonight once began in moments just like this, half dream, half story. In our next chapter, we'll wander further into time, to the age when explorers and strangers first glimpsed the haka and tried to understand it through their own restless eyes. But tonight, stay where it's warm, with rain still dripping from leaves and the hum of belonging all around. Breathe in the scent of wet wood. Breathe out the world's long exhale. The village speaks in echoes still, soft, slow, eternal. Sleep easy, my friend. Good evening again, my dream-bound companion. We've drifted across oceans and listened to villages hum their stories into the wind. Tonight, we turn our gaze back to the sea, the same sea that once carried the ancestors, now carrying something else. Before we begin, take a slow breath in and out. Make sure you're comfortable. Pull the blanket a little closer. Let your shoulders settle into stillness. You're safe here, floating between words and sleep. And if these soft tales bring you a measure of rest, you can always whisper a like or subscribe when the morning light returns. Only if your heart remembers. Now imagine this. It is the late 18th century. The ocean is as vast as ever, but the world is beginning to shrink. Across that endless blue, sails appear, tall, pale, and unfamiliar, like clouds that forgot where the sky ends. They belong to ships with names that sound like whispers in a foreign tongue. One such ship, perhaps commanded by Captain James Cook himself, drifts toward Aotearoa's northern coast. The sailors squint at the green cliffs, the curling smoke, the dark figures watching from shore. They've never seen such land before, so alive, so steeped in mist. The MΑΟRI, meanwhile, stand poised on the beach. Spears glint, tattoos gleam, eyes sharp beneath the sun. They are not frightened, only curious and cautious in the way of people who've survived 1,000 unknowns already. The air hums with tension, but it's the kind that happens before a conversation, not a battle. And then it begins. A chant, low and rhythmic, rising from the throats of the warriors on the sand. Stamps of feet, claps of hands, the old heartbeat returning. The Europeans freeze. They do not understand. They see fierce faces, wide eyes, tongues thrust out, bodies trembling in unison. To them, it looks like fury. But what they are witnessing is welcome. Intense, yes, but sacred. The Haka. Cook, or perhaps one of his men, scribbles something into a journal that night. He writes that the natives performed a war dance. He notes the horrid grimaces, the wild yells, and yet between the lines there's a trace of awe. Even misunderstanding cannot dull the power of shared rhythm. I imagine one sailor, younger than the rest, standing apart on the deck, watching. He feels his chest tighten with something he can't name. It isn't fear, it's recognition. He's heard rhythms like this before, drums in distant ports, hymns rising from home. He just doesn't realize yet that the heartbeat is universal. Down on the shore, the Haka finishes with a final shout that cracks the air like a wave breaking. Silence follows, thick and charged. The wind holds its breath. And then, peace. The MΑΟRI lower their weapons. The visitors lower their guns. Someone smiles. And in that small exchange, history takes a deep, calming breath. When you picture that moment, don't think of it as confrontation. Think of it as two worlds trying to read each other's music. One plays violins and compasses, the other bone flutes and memory. Both, in their own way, sing to the sea. The villagers offer food, perhaps roasted fish, maybe kumara wrapped in leaves. The strangers bring trinkets, beads, nails, shiny coins. The air fills with the scent of smoke and salt. Hands gesture awkwardly. Smiles bridge what words cannot. The sailor, I imagine, let's call him Thomas, leans forward, captivated. He sees how every movement of the Haka has purpose. The stomp is a story, the shout is punctuation, the silence a sentence break. He doesn't know the meaning, but he feels it in his bones, the way you feel a drum through the soles of your feet. Later, when night falls, he lies awake in his narrow bunk, the ship rocking gently, and the chant plays in his head like a lullaby he can't quite place. He doesn't know it, but centuries later, that same rhythm will echo in stadiums, in classrooms, in the hearts of millions who will call it by name. The misunderstanding of that day would echo too. Many explorers after Cook would write about the Haka as a war dance, unable to see its softness, its joy, its invitation to unity. But the truth always lingers beneath the noise, like a current under waves. Let's drift down into that current now. Imagine a Maori chief, his name perhaps Te Rangi Hayata or Hongi Hika, standing before his people a few decades later. European ships are more common now. Trade flows like a river. Guns, cloth, and language mingle with flax, shell, and wood. The Haka changes too, subtly, taking on new meanings. Some become gestures of diplomacy, others acts of pride, statements that say, "We remain ourselves." When chiefs greeted foreign visitors, they performed hakas of welcome, the movements grand but measured. When they mourned losses brought by disease or war, the haka turned mournful, a pulse of grief. When they celebrated peace, it became gentle again, like the sea smoothing itself after a storm. History books record these moments as political encounters, but beneath that surface, I see something human and simple. People using rhythm to remember who they are when the world starts changing too fast. You and I do the same, in smaller ways. We hum our favorite songs in traffic, stir our coffee to a rhythm we don't even notice, tap our thumbs against phone screens in time with thoughts. The Haka just does it louder, prouder, older. The Europeans, fascinated, sometimes try to mimic it, awkwardly stamping, laughing, missing the weight behind the motions. But imitation, however clumsy, is a kind of admiration. The Haka was already doing what it always had, spreading through breath and curiosity, not conquest. Imagine now a quiet evening on a Maori beach in the early 1800s. The day's visitors have left. The fires burn low. Children sit on the sand, eyes wide, replaying the spectacle of strangers with pale faces and heavy boots. An elder watches them and begins to chant, not in challenge, but in calm. A new Haka takes shape, born from that day's bewilderment. His voice is slow, deliberate, the words carrying warmth. The wind brings visitors, the earth remembers us. The others join, their voices weaving into the night. It is not about fear. It is about rhythm holding identity steady against the tide. And as I tell it, I can feel the cadence under my own words, the way the syllables roll like small waves against the hull of sleep. Even the first missionaries who arrived later, stern men with heavy coats and heavier beliefs, couldn't help but be moved by the Haka. They tried to fit it into neat boxes, ritual, performance, spectacle. But the Haka slipped through all categories, as it still does. You can't contain breath. You can only share it. There's something poetic about that, isn't there? The more the world tried to label the Haka, the more it proved alive. Let's linger in that thought. Picture a moon hanging over a calm bay. The sea glows silver. The same moonlight touches both ship and shore, the foreign and the familiar. You can't tell where one reflection ends and the other begins. That's history's secret. It's never truly divided. In that silvery stillness, the Haka continues to evolve. It absorbs new words, new rhythms, new stories. Some about ancestors, some about the strange newcomers with their iron and ink. But always it remains rooted in the breath that began it. The shimmer of Aotearoa dancing for his mother. If you could float above that scene, sailors sleeping in hammocks, villagers curled under woven mats, you'd see that both groups, though separated by culture and ocean, move with the same rhythm. Inhale, exhale, rise, fall. the universe's quiet metronome ticking on. And isn't that what the Haka really teaches? That no matter the noise of misunderstanding, we are, in the end, rhythmic creatures, beating hearts in borrowed shells. As the century turns, the Haka will find new forms, sung in schools, whispered in ceremonies, performed on battlefields far from home. But that's for another night. For now, let's stay here, in this liminal moment where strangers became neighbors under the moon's calm gaze. The fires along the beach die down. The waves murmur softly, pretending to sleep. On deck, young Thomas dreams again of stamping feet and voices rising like thunder. Though in his dream, the sound is peaceful. It reminds him of rain. The old chief by the fire watches the stars and hums to himself, a tune his ancestors brought across the sea. He hums for his grandchildren, and perhaps, in some cosmic way, for you too. Because stories like these, softly told, gently carried, never really end. They just drift from one set of ears to another, across generations, across oceans, across screens glowing faintly in the dark. And as you lie there now, eyes heavy, heart slow, imagine the hush that fell after the first meeting. That perfect, trembling silence when everyone simply breathed together. That was the real moment history changed. Not the signing of treaties or the clash of empires, but that shared pause. So let's pause here too. Breathe in, breathe out. The sea is calm again. The strangers have names now. The Haka has found new listeners. And as we drift into Chapter 5, we'll explore how the Haka traveled beyond ritual, how it became the rhythm of identity itself, beating quietly beneath modern New Zealand. For now, close your eyes. The tide is kind tonight, and the sea still hums with echoes. Sleep well, my friend. Good evening once more, my quiet companion. You've crossed seas, wandered through villages, stood beneath the same moon that watched over the first meetings of worlds. Tonight, the waves of time carry us further, into the age of maps and telegraphs, of treaties written in careful ink and lives rewritten in quiet defiance. Before we begin, take a slow, deep breath. Feel your chest rise and fall like a tide that's learned patience. Let the weight of your blanket become an anchor. If this gentle story soothes you, you may always whisper a like or subscribe, but only after you've drifted safely toward rest. Now, picture Aotearoa in the mid-1800s. The land is changing its rhythm. Forests are thinning, rivers redirected, towns appearing where fern once ruled. The Māori still sing, still carve, still dance, but the world presses in from every side. The Haka, once the roar of entire valleys, becomes, in some places, a whisper. Yet, even a whisper carries power. There's a story from that era about a small gathering in a meeting house near Rotorua. It's winter. The rain hums on the roof like a steady drumbeat. Inside, men and women sit close around a central fire. They're discussing the latest treaty terms, the loss of land, the arrival of missionaries who promise heaven but misunderstand the earth. The mood is heavy, but then an elder stands. He does not lecture, he does not scold, he begins to chant. The rhythm is slow, almost a lullaby. Others join softly at first, then louder, until the voices fill the space between raindrops. The Haka, once a symbol of greeting or challenge, becomes here a vessel of memory. Each stomp says, "We are still here." Each breath says, "We will not vanish quietly." I like to think of that moment not as rebellion, but as resilience wrapped in rhythm. Sometimes survival hums instead of shouts. As colonization deepened, many European settlers misread the Haka again, recording it as quaint, primitive, or theatrical. But in the corners of villages, Where history is kept safe behind smiles, the old rhythms persisted. Children learned the gestures by imitation, copying their elders by firelight. And even when schools discouraged native language, the body still remembered the dance. There's something profoundly comforting about that. The idea that culture can live inside muscles. Words may be banned, but movement finds a way. Imagine a child, barefoot on cool soil, stamping softly in secret. His grandmother watches from the doorway, pretending not to see, but humming under her breath. That hum, gentle, proud, unbroken, is the sound of the Haka surviving. It's not unlike how you might hum an old lullaby without realizing your grandmother used to sing it too. Memory hides in melody. By the late 19th century, New Zealand had become a colony in full swing. Railways cut through green hills. Telegraph lines hummed like steel vines. Yet the Haka continued to echo, especially at gatherings where tribes met to assert identity. The Haka was no longer just a ritual. It was a declaration of endurance. Some European visitors began to notice its beauty rather than its ferocity. Travel journals from that time describe it with surprise, how the dance could shift from solemn to joyous in a heartbeat. The movement, one wrote, was so unified, I could scarcely believe it spontaneous. But of course it was spontaneous. Unity was the point. That's the quiet genius of the Haka. It binds individuality into one breath. You can't perform it alone and mean it. It only works when everyone surrenders to the same rhythm. The 20th century dawned like a sudden sunrise, bright, industrial, restless. New Zealanders of all backgrounds began shaping a shared national story, sometimes uneasily, sometimes beautifully, and the Haka began to walk between worlds. I imagine a dusty rugby field sometime around 1905. The New Zealand national team, later called the All Blacks, stand in formation. Across from them, a crowd of British spectators waits, expecting a match, not a moment of myth. But before the first whistle, one player steps forward. He begins a chant. His teammates follow, stomping, clapping, calling to the ancestors, to each other, to the land. The Haka has found a new stage. The crowd is silent at first, unsure. Then the sound of it, deep, rhythmic, unstoppable, fills the cold English air. Reporters scribble furiously. The words fierce and terrifying appear in headlines. But the Māori players, and their Pākehā teammates too, understand it differently. For them, it's not about intimidation. It's about bringing home wherever they go. That first international Haka was a bridge between centuries, a gesture that said, you may draw your maps, but we still define our horizon. From then on, the Haka travelled farther than any canoe could dream. It appeared in parades, in schools, in protests, in songs. Some versions grew modern accents, guitars, microphones, city echo. Others stayed traditional, whispered in marae courtyards under starlight. Still, the same heartbeat pulsed beneath all of them. Let's pause for a moment to feel it. Tap your fingers gently on your blanket. 1, 2, 1, 2. That's it. That's the Haka. Alive even in the quiet. You might smile at the idea of a sleep story inviting you to tap along, but there's something grounding about it, isn't there? A reminder that history isn't a museum exhibit. It's a pulse we can still match. Now imagine a Māori school teacher in the 1920s Wellington, standing before a classroom of fidgeting children. The government has banned the language, but she hums a rhythm under her breath as she writes arithmetic on the chalkboard. The children recognize it. During lunch, they sneak outside and practice the steps behind the shed. Dust flies, laughter echoes, and for a few stolen minutes, the world feels right again. That's how culture survives, quietly, joyfully, against the odds. The Haka even traveled to battlefields far from home. During the World Wars, Maori soldiers performed it in camps and trenches, their voices carrying across mud and wire. Letters from fellow soldiers described the strange comfort of hearing those chants at dusk, how it made everyone feel less alone. One wrote, "It was as if the earth itself was singing through them." Imagine that, in a foreign field under foreign stars, the same rhythm that once rose from beaches and fern valleys, now keeping young men steady amid chaos. The Haka had become not just a dance, but a prayer of belonging. It's remarkable, isn't it? How the same sound can mean courage, grief, humor, and hope all at once. That's what makes the Haka timeless. It refuses to pick just one emotion. It contains them all. By the 1950s and 60s, the Haka had become a proud symbol of New Zealand identity, shared across cultures, languages, and generations. But at its core, it remained Māori, a gift the nation borrowed but never truly owned. In every performance, you could still hear the echo of Aotearoa shimmering in the heat, the first dancer of sunlight. As modernization rolled forward, cars, television, skyscrapers, the Haka adapted again. It appeared in classrooms, in ceremonies, in quiet gatherings on front lawns. And through it all, elders reminded their communities, the Haka is not anger, it is energy. It is breath. I find that line endlessly calming. It is breath. Perhaps, if you listen closely now, you can hear your own breathing sink to that truth. Slow, steady, alive. The heartbeat that wouldn't fade. It's the same one that has pulsed since the first canoes touched the sand, since the first shimmer of heat rose above a summer plain. Some nights, when I can't sleep, I imagine the Haka not as movement or sound, but as light. Tiny golden particles drifting through time, hovering above the islands, glowing softly every time someone remembers to listen. It doesn't need noise. It exists even in silence, especially in silence. And maybe, tonight, as your thoughts slow, that same light hums in your room. It's not ancient history anymore. It's present breath. It's your breath. The Haka's endurance isn't just a cultural miracle. It's a meditation on how life persists. Through colonization, through change, through misunderstanding, the dance never stopped shimmering. It just adjusted its tempo, waiting for the world to catch up. As we near the end of this chapter, let's visit one more image. Picture a modern Haka, perhaps at a school graduation. Dozens of students, Māori and non-Māori alike, standing shoulder to shoulder, their voices rising in perfect unity. The audience quiets, phones lowered for once. The sound fills the air, not fierce, not loud, but full. Each stomp, each breath, each cry says, "We are connected." Somewhere in that crowd, an old woman watches. She remembers when her grandmother hummed those rhythms in secret. She wipes her eyes and smiles. The heartbeat has returned home. History is rarely kind, but it can be forgiving. And the Haka, gentle as dawn, proves that beauty can outlast conquest if it keeps its rhythm. As the night deepens, let that rhythm carry you toward rest. The same pulse that once echoed through fern forests now moves quietly through your chest. In our final chapter, we'll rest beside the present, where Haka lives on as a lullaby of identity, unity, and remembrance. But for now, let your breathing fall into sync with the tide of time. In and out. The heartbeat continues. Soft, steady, eternal. Sleep well. Good evening, dear dreamer. You've come a long way with me, across oceans, through mist, into villages and hearts. Tonight, we reach the shore of the present day, where history lies not in books or museums, but in people, breathing, moving, remembering. Before we begin, take a slow breath, in and out. Let your body settle like a canoe finally resting on calm water. If this long, quiet journey has helped you drift, you may always leave a like or subscribe. Only when the morning returns, only if it feels right. Now, close your eyes and imagine New Zealand at dawn. The land is awake but unhurried. Fog gathers at the edges of fields. Somewhere a school bell rings, a kettle whistles. A river hums the same lullaby it's sung since before names existed. And in that air, clear, clean, faintly sweet with grass, someone begins to chant. Perhaps it's a group of students rehearsing for assembly, their sneakers squeaking on the gym floor. Perhaps it's a Haka group tuning their voices before a performance. Or perhaps it's just one person, alone on a hill, murmuring the words their grandfather taught them. Ta he MΑORI, the breath of life. That phrase opens many Hakas, and it's fitting that it opens our last story too. Because after everything, the voyages, the colonization, the misunderstanding, the revival, the Haka has always been about breath, shared breath, living breath. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't stood inside that circle of sound. The moment before it begins, when everyone's eyes meet, and silence stretches like a held inhale. Then, a unified exhale, a rush of sound, like wind filling a sail. You feel the air vibrate against your skin. It's not performance, it's communion. Let's walk quietly through a modern marae, a meeting place. Just as the sun tips over the horizon, the carved ancestors along the roof beams catch the first light, their wooden eyes glowing faintly. A group of teenagers sits cross-legged, laughing softly, phones tucked away for once. Their leader, a woman in her 30s, calls for attention. Her voice is calm, gentle, steady. The kind of voice that could guide a ship through fog. She explains that Haka is not just for warriors or sports. It is a living language. Each motion is a word, each breath a sentence, each silence a comma in the story of belonging. She teaches the students to stand with feet grounded, shoulders relaxed, chins high, not in pride, but in balance. And when they begin, the first stomp shakes dust from the floorboards. Their voices rise, not yet perfect, but pure. It's not the ferocious roar seen on TV. It's a slower rhythm, one meant to honor. Their chant speaks of dawn and ancestors, of rivers that remember names. A janitor sweeping the courtyard stops to listen. Birds in the rafters pause their chirping. Even the breeze holds still, curious. For a few heartbeats, the past and present overlap. No centuries between them, no languages, no fences. Just one long breath moving through time. That's what the Haka has become now, the sound of continuity. It's there at weddings, when families blend into one. It's there at funerals, when grief trembles into gratitude. It's there at graduations, protests, concerts, even lullabies whispered to babies who fall asleep mid-chant. Everywhere it goes, it gathers meaning like light gathers on water. There's a phrase Māori elders sometimes use, ka mua ka muri, walking backward into the future. It means we move forward by facing our past, never turning our backs on it. That's the Haka's philosophy too. Every forward step recalls those who stepped before. When I think about that, I see a pattern forming, a cosmic choreography. Aotearoa still dances in the heat haze. The voyagers still paddle under the stars. The villagers still hum by their fires. The rugby teams still call to the sky before every match. And tonight, you and I sit here breathing the same rhythm, all of it, one dance endlessly looping. If you listen closely enough, you might hear it even in the quiet of your room. The low hum of a far-off ocean, the faint beat beneath your pulse. That's the Haka whispering through the centuries. Sometimes, when people see it performed for the first time, they think it's about power, and it is, but not the kind that dominates. It's the power of presence, of being fully awake in a world that rushes too fast. The Haka demands that you stop, breathe, and exist completely in that moment. And that, in itself, is an act of peace. I once met a Maori musician who said, "The Haka is how we tell the earth we're still paying attention." I asked him what that meant. He smiled and said, "When we dance, the ground remembers us." That line stayed with me. Maybe it's staying with you now. Let's pause. Listen to the imaginary soundscape around us. Soft footsteps on wet grass, a river sighing nearby, a chorus of morning insects starting their day. Let them form the background rhythm to your breathing. In, out. The Haka is happening somewhere in that breath. Now the day brightens. We see modern Aotearoa, cities rising beside mountains, glass towers beside green valleys. A commuter bus rumbles past a mural of a dancer mid-Haka, painted in swirling reds and blues. A child in uniform practices the gestures in a reflection, tongue out, grin wide. An elder watching from the bus stop smiles. The lineage continues. Across the world, millions have seen versions of this dance in stadiums and ceremonies. Yet behind every performance lies that same gentle shimmer of heat, the child of the sun god dancing for his mother, the breath that began everything. It's strange, isn't it? Something so ancient, so local, has become universal comfort. Even people who don't understand the words feel calmer after watching. The rhythm steadies them. It reminds us all that the body itself can pray. When you think about it, the Haka is like a lullaby disguised as thunder. It begins with fire, but ends with peace. Every stomp burns away noise until only calm remains. And maybe that's why it feels right to tell this as a sleep story. Because the Haka is in its heart, the body learning to rest in its own strength. Let's close our eyes now and imagine one final scene. It's twilight again, at the same bay where we began 6 nights ago. The sea is glassy, silvered by moonlight. A small group stands barefoot in the sand. Men, women, children. Their shadows long and soft. They are not performing for anyone. There are no cameras, no crowd. They are simply greeting the evening. The chant begins. A gentle murmur, not a shout. Hands move, feet press into the sand. Each movement is slow, deliberate, full of affection. The waves echo them, returning every sound with a whisper. When they finish, no applause follows. Only the hush of night and the faint hiss of the tide pulling back. One child giggles, an elder pats their head, and the group sits down right there watching the horizon melt into darkness. The Haka has become silence again. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. And perhaps that's what all stories hope to be when they end. A silence that holds everything. So now, my friend, we've reached our silence too. We've followed the shimmer of Aotearoa from sunlight to moonlight, from the first breath to this one. We've watched the Haka cross centuries, survive storms, soften hearts. And through it all, one truth remained constant. The rhythm never stopped. It lives in the land. It lives in the people. And for a brief, quiet moment tonight, it lived in us. As you drift now, eyes heavy, thoughts slow, let that rhythm cradle you. Let it beat softly beneath your dreams, steady and kind. You don't need to remember every detail, the names, the dates, the legends. Just remember the feeling. The warmth of the fire, the hush of mist, the sound of hundreds breathing as one. That's the true heartbeat of Aotearoa. May it lull you gently into rest. May it remind you that every ending is just another inhale before the next story begins. Now, breathe once more with me, in and out. The Haka fades into the dark, but the shimmer remains, golden, quiet, eternal. Sleep, traveler, and as the final whisper of history dissolves into dreams, hear one last soft farewell from the storyteller's voice. May these memories guide you into peaceful dreams. If you drifted off, let me know below. Sweet dreams. Until next time. Good night. The sea hushes. The mist returns. The heartbeat rests.